Buddhist Studies Advisory Committee here at Emmanuel. I'm also the editor of a new book by Sumeru Publications here in Canada called 1,000 Arms, which is a guidebook to Buddhist care work. There's some local contributors and some people who are visitors here who are contributors involved with the book. So that's who I am. I'm going to be moderating the panel this afternoon on Buddhist prison chaplaincy here in Canada. I think what we're going to do is introduce each speaker. They will give their remarks. We'll have about 5 minutes each for questions, and then when the 3 speakers have concluded, we'll have a bit longer to have some crosstalk and questions that can involve all of the speakers. So I'll introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Cuilan Liu, who is new to the university. She is the Assistant Professor of Buddhist Studies here at Emmanuel. She received her PhD from Harvard University for her dissertation on the status and role of music within the Buddhist religious tradition, and its subsequent interpretation in China and Tibet. She received a second PhD in critical media practice offered by the Harvard Film Studies Center, for which she completed the 83-minute documentary film Young Jigme, shot in the Buddhist monastery in northeastern Tibet. Dr. Liu's sustained interest in Buddhism and law brought her to teach and conduct research in the United States, Germany, China, and Canada. In 2014, she held a postdoctoral fellowship at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, Germany. Prior to joining Emmanuel, she also held a Mellon postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of East Asian Studies at McGill, where her research focused on Buddhism and the state in Middle Period China. Would you all please welcome Dr. Liu?
And his team for making this wonderful conference available. I'm extremely honored and pleased to be invited to be speaker on this panel on Buddhist chaplains in Canadian prisons. Okay, let me just adjust this. I want to begin with a lawsuit that happened in 2013. So on March 14, 2013, 8 inmates and the Western Coast Prison Justice Society, they filed a lawsuit against the federal government and the Minister of Public Safety. And centering this complaint was concerns over the federal government's decision to cut all the part-time chaplaincy positions, which represents the non-Christian faith traditions practiced by inmates in these Canadian prisons. So in my presentation today, I would like to revisit the lawsuit, and I would like to also share my observations on the challenges faced by Buddhist chaplaincies in Canadian prisons based on information revealed in this lawsuit, documents associated with these lawsuits. Upon examining this complaint filed in March 2013, I noticed a few things that may serve as a starting point for discussion at this panel on Buddhist chaplains in Canadian prisons. The first challenge that I noticed concerns the range of services that are available for Buddhist chaplains to provide to inmates. So from this document, from this notice of complaint registered in the Supreme Court in British Columbia, of the 8 inmates, 2 of them have self-identified as Buddhists. So these are Mr. Charles White and Mr. Peter Ashton. Mr. Charles White, the first inmate, Buddhist inmate, self-identified as a Tibetan Buddhist, belonged to the Gelu lineage, and this is the sect to which the 14th Dalai Lama belongs to, the Gelupa lineage. According to this court document, Charles White became a Buddhist while in federal custody in a previous sentence, and he had been practicing Buddhism for 9 years when the lawsuit filed. but I am more interested in the second inmate, second Buddhist inmate. So the second Buddhist inmate, Mr. Peter Ashton, was at that time 46 years old, and he was serving a life sentence. And according to this court document, Mr. Peter Ashton claimed that in 1997, he was the first prisoner in North America to receive monastic vows with the assistance of a Buddhist chaplain. So here what really struck me and what got me really interested in this document was the phrase monastic vow. And I've been pondering on its implication for the practice of Buddhist chaplaincy in prisons in general. I'm interested in this term because if this is an accurate description of Mr. Peter Ashton's experience, then we might have some issues, or there might be questions that we have to reconsider. For instance, I guess for many of us who are here today, this is probably not unfamiliar to you. In the Buddhist tradition, monastic vows are taken by individuals who aspire to to enter Buddhist monastic life, and this includes individuals who aspire to become novices, probationary nuns, or fully ordained monks and nuns. And lay Buddhist practitioners, the lay Buddhist householders, they have the option to take the 3 refugees or 4 refugees in the Tibetan tradition, and plus the 5 lay Buddhist per sects. So what this means is, in this context, if the Buddhist inmate Mr. Peter Ashton had received monastic vows, the implication would be that he was either ordained as a Buddhist novice monk or fully ordained Buddhist monk while serving a sentence in prison. So my question is this possible with the sole assistance of a Buddhist chaplain? And because access to inmate data is restricted and confidential, and I was unable to reach the inmate for a conversation about this, it may be possible that the description of monastic, the term monastic vow that was used in this legal document was not accurate because the document was prepared by a law firm representing these inmates. So this could be the case. Okay. I guess because we are having, one of my co-panelists today, I was really happy to see her to be here because I don't know, maybe at some point she might be able to help us clarify the situation. But what I'm interested in is not the personal religious status of Mr. Peter Ashton as an individual. What I am interested in is what does this mean for the practice of Buddhist chaplaincy in prisons? What kind of religious services in the Buddhist tradition can we provide? Is there a limit? So my purpose today for making this presentation is not to criticize the validity of Mr. Peter Ashton's claim as the first prison in North America to receive the monastic vow, nor that of the conferral of these monastic vows by the Buddhist chaplain, but instead, what I saw in this case is one possible challenge for Buddhist chaplains working in prisons, and that is, if a serving inmate requests ordination as a Buddhist novice monk, or even a monk or nun, or even requests full ordination, how should a Buddhist chaplain respond to that request? What can we do? Is there a room to accommodate that request? So establishing a monastic sangha in the prison, is that possible? So I guess my presentation today is I'm not sharing what I know, I'm only exposing what I don't know. And it's so great that we have so many scholars of Buddhist studies, practitioners, and we also have many venerable Dharma teachers and abbots and abbas from different monasteries. So I'm here proposing these questions, and I would really appreciate your feedback and comments on these questions. And the second challenge that I saw in this this lawsuit is about was inspired by a CBC interview with the Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. So about 5 months before the British Columbia inmates filed their complaint against the federal government and the Minister of Public Safety, the Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety she showed up on an interview with CBC on October 5th in 2012. And in that interview, she was trying to explain the rationale behind the federal government's decision to cut all the part-time chaplaincy positions. So I want to show you a clip of that interview. So we don't have any sound?
There's a formula that determines what specific religion will have an actual spiritual leader there, either a pastor, a rabbi, whatever the religion is, that is determined by a formula within each facility, depending on what is the majority of the religion that is represented. So, for example, there were some full-time religious providers and services of a specific religion. There were part-time of a different religion, and then there were many religions that had no services provided at all. So what we decided to do was cut all of the part-time and have one full-time spiritual advisor. So what we are wanting to see is we want to see chaplains, as they're called, but really they can be of any religion. We want to see chaplains who are hired, who will provide spiritual service on a request basis by the inmates.
Okay. So, according to her explanation of the rationale, what she's suggesting is, there was an expectation, she was suggesting this model, there was an expectation from the federal government to expect one chaplain to provide religious services to inmates of different faith traditions. So, in the latter part of this interview, her fellow panelists, immediately rejected and, criticized and protested about this plan. And expressions of this objection was not uncommonly heard or read in news coverage following the federal government's announcement of this decision. So, the essential challenge, I think, in this proposed model was, can one chaplain serve in more than one faith tradition and be recognized and be endorsed by these different faith traditions? So in the rest of my presentation, I would like to re-examine this strategy and explore its implication for the practice of Buddhist chaplaincy in Canadian prisons. Instead of focusing on the chaplains themselves, I would like to shift our attention to the inmates that these chaplains work with and provide spiritual support for. So first of all, let me give you some figures. I like numbers. So according to data extracted from the Offender Management System, is the OMS, released in April 2005, 387 or 2% of the inmates in federal prisons have self-identified as Buddhists. And in the next 10 years, the number of Buddhist inmates in Canadian prisons increased from 387 to 483. And these changes in the number of Muslim and Jewish inmates were similar. So basically they went up slightly and following a similar pattern. Among these Buddhist inmates, only 15 or 16 of them were female. Those inmates who have self-identified as Buddhists practicing Buddhism. 15 or 16 of them were female. And moreover, the ethnic backgrounds of these inmates show that 49% of these inmates were of Asian backgrounds, and that includes, East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And the rest of the other 51% were either white, black, or of First Nations origins. So for Buddhist chaplain, for Buddhist chaplains who aspire to work in the prisons, the fact that 51% of the Buddhist inmates are of non-Asian ethnic backgrounds may indicate need for more complex spiritual support. If using the terms that I've recently heard from one of Toronto's, popular Buddhist teacher, Pandit Sarapana, among these 51% of non-Asian Buddhists, there could be Christbus, Musbus, and Jusbus. And these are referring to individuals who were Christians, Muslims, or Jews, but later developed an interest in Buddhism. And this may or may not indicate a need in Canadian prisons for Buddhist chaplains who are capable of working with non-Buddhist traditions. And in other words, multi-faith chaplains are needed in Canadian prisons. And so, for instance, when I just want to, this is like a made-up example. I don't know if my co-panelists might have some experiences with working with individuals like this. For instance, when a baptized Christian inmate who is now interested in Buddhism seeks answers to questions like, can I remain a Christian, be a practicing Christian, but at the same time take refugees and precepts to become a lay or ordained Buddhist, can I do that? And who is more suitable and qualified to address this concern and to provide spiritual support to these inmates? Could it be done by a Christian chaplain, a Buddhist chaplain, a baptized chaplain trained in Buddhist chaplaincy programs like the ones we are offering here, or a Buddhist chaplain trained in Christian chaplaincy? So these are my questions. And for those who aspire to become Buddhist chaplains working with Canadian inmates, I think their first challenge will be, how can they develop the capacity to work with practitioners of multiple faith traditions or individuals simultaneously connected with more than one faith tradition? Now it's like 30 seconds of advertisement of our program here at Emmanuel College. At Emmanuel College, we do have programs like the MPS program, focusing on Buddhism, and these programs are developed to help our students reach the first goal by providing them opportunities to take courses in Buddhist thought, history, text, ethics, and options to explore similar subjects in the Christian and Islamic traditions. And moreover, our students also have the opportunities to closely interact with fellow students living these non-Buddhist traditions, to observe, to learn, and to explore beyond their comfort zone, which is in the Buddhist tradition. What remains, and this is what concerns me as a faculty teaching and leading the Buddhist Studies program at Emmanuel, what remains one of the biggest challenge, I think, for future chaplains is how can they gain endorsement from multiple faith traditions? Or is that possible at all? Will Buddhist communities endorse a practicing Christian who has successfully completed an MPS program in Buddhism to work with Buddhist inmates? If not, will the same denial or will the same difficulties be experienced by Buddhist chaplains who have completed additional training in Christian chaplaincy when they seek endorsement from the Christian community? So in this short presentation, I have shared a few observations on the challenges faced by future chaplains who aspire to work with Canadian inmates. These challenges, I think, are not unique in prisons, but they are also what chaplains in other workplaces need to deal with if they haven't already dealt with them. I could only, make a presentation on the case for the Canadian inmates because I don't have access to the other data sets, but I think it's a challenge shared by chaplains working in different workplaces. So instead of providing solutions, I'm merely posing these questions for discussion, and I look forward to insights from my fellow panelists, experienced chaplains, and renowned scholars of Buddhist studies and Dharma teachers, and also leaders, spiritual leaders, and abbots and abbess from Buddhist monasteries and nunneries. I think this is a question that really needs to be addressed, and I think these questions are extremely important for us, especially at Emmanuel College when we are beginning a new program. We are exploring options to train qualified, spiritual leaders, for tomorrow. So I think a discussion on these questions will be very important when we consider how can we develop our curriculum so that our students will be more qualified when they graduate. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Questions, if anyone has a question.
Speaking as an interfaith chaplain, generally my understanding of chaplaincy is very in different sort of categories, but the chaplains work in an interfaith model, and it's a human condition first. I think there's a difference between spiritual and religion. And when it comes to the government, they're very interested in spiritual. They won't even touch the environment. So when we start to work at different religious beliefs, it kind of drops off. So the basic concept is that the chaplain helps a person to be at peace with their circumstances. They're not interested so much in providing a ceremony. So that's a lot of the challenge that we face in Canada. I don't know about the United States.
I'm really interested in, hearing comments and on the first question. Should I briefly summarize it in Chinese so that I can get? Okay, so 我就是
Please speak English. The
Okay.
Chinese sound good here.
Okay, so yeah, if you have any comments, I would really appreciate.
The
Yeah.
microphone so everybody could hear. If you have a question.
I can repeat it as well if it's easier. So on the first issue, did you mean monasticism?
How to respond to inmates' request for ordination, to go through ordination to become a Buddhist novice, or even seeking full ordination?
I think you raise a really important distinction when it comes to services being provided to inmates or persons. Is it general spiritual support services, or is it an actual religious service? If it's a religious service, then ideally, in my mind, you have someone from a particular faith tradition who's actually established within that faith tradition and is actually empowered to provide that religious service, providing a particular ordination or service of a particular tradition.
Yeah.
So, for example, I wouldn't have someone who's an imam giving the Holy Eucharist and doing transubstantiation. That's not within their ballpark.
My question is not who has the qualification, who is qualified to provide this service. And my question is, can these requests be met, within the Buddhist tradition, especially if you look at the Buddhist Vinaya tradition? Can we do that? Yeah, please.
I've been serving the prison for the last 12 years, but not as a chaplain, as a meditation teacher. But I do have inmates, buddies, who have taken the 3 refuge, who has taken the 5 precepts, but none of them should have taken the monastic vows, because monastic vows have to be performed in such a way that you have qualified teachers, qualified Buddhist monks and nuns. It's not just like, okay, I'm transferring merits to you. No, it's actually transferring the body of the precepts as a lineage from Sakyamuni Buddha and all the past teachers, and through one monastic teacher or 10 monastic teachers for an inmate in the prison. I think monastic vows is impossible. So Peter Ashton, this name sounds very familiar. I think I know him because that's where I served in PC prison.
Okay.
I doubt about the monastic vows.
Maybe the law firm made a mistake when they use this.
I think it's just a householder, a lay person. Or could be the monk who, I don't know. It could be under Sister Anne at that time. So I think
I actually can answer that question.
Yeah, so I think monastic vow is actually out of the question as for inmate inside the prison.
Especially when the description was with the sole assistance of a Buddhist chaplain to receive the monastic vow. I was really having a.
I think all the monastics here echo with me on this. Have a consensus on this because there is a certain rule to ordain monastics, and also a female nun cannot ordain a monk. And a householder cannot ordain a monastic.
Is the problem only with the ordination ceremony itself needing this number of monks and nuns, or is there also a problem with just the isolated individual person not living within a monastic community?
So I guess maybe another way to frame your question is that if we have 3 qualified Buddhist monastics and 7 witnesses, so we have to, the required number of qualified Buddhist teachers in that circumstance, can we offer ordination to them if they request it?
So my question is, beyond ordination, can a person, even if ordination could be brought together with the requisite proper people for that prisoner, can the what about the life of the prisoner? The life of the prisoner isolated from no monastic community, just in the prison by himself. Is that permissible if he were ordained?
I want to be respectful of the other speakers. I just had a quick response to John on that, and then Venerable, I saw your hand, and Sir, I saw your hand, and I think we'll just take you in there. One quick response on that. I don't know about Ashton as the first person with that claim. There was a prisoner in the early 90s named Frankie Parker who was on death row, and he was a Buddhist, and his last request was to be ordained. And his spiritual advisor was Kibutsu Malone, who is the director of the Engaged Zen Foundation. And apparently, I guess to the satisfaction of the tradition, he was ordained, but then moments later executed. So he didn't actually get to kind of live a monastic life. It was moot, that he was ordained and then promptly walked to, I think, the electric chair in that case. So, Venerable.
We were just talking about the ceremony to proceed the ordination. So the Venerable answered that it's impossible because we have a formal ceremony that requires at least for monk is 10 teachers, for nun is 20 teachers to make this happen. But before you take the ceremony or take the ordination, there are some qualifications for you to become monastic. Is the first for women, you cannot pregnant. And I think there is one that you cannot have the sentence. You cannot commit the crime, so that you only can take after you fulfill the sentence. So that one you mentioned works because right away go to the death. The electric chair means that his punishment is over. But again, ordination has different meaning. There is lay ordination, there's a monastic ordination, so the lay people can take ordination as well. It's kind of a spiritual commitment, but it is monastic ordination, that's not possible.
Thank you. And then, Sir, and then I think we have to let you be the last word so we can...
Yeah, very brief. The quorum has been addressed by several, and also there is a list of obstacles to ordination. It seems like one of them is having to fulfill one's sentence in one's committed crime. But just another thing I wanted to mention, in Tibetan Buddhist traditions, there is a state of a household where you can take, instead of sexual purity, there's a celibacy vow. So it's not monastic ordination, but it is a state of lay life where you take that celibacy vow. That is certainly, I think, within the realm of possibility for this particular spirit.
That's the lay precepts. That's the lay precepts. We're talking about monastic
Sure, I'm
vows.
just mentioning that it is a different state that includes celibacy, so monastic life, but not technically not monastic.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. We can take more questions at the end, but we'll move on at this point. Next, we have Ms. Cara Braun. Now, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's Kara.
Kara, pardon me. Ms. Cara Braun, who served as a community chaplain in Kingston, Ontario between the summer of 2013 and the spring of 2016. She worked for a small nonprofit organization supporting mostly men coming out of local minimum security federal corrections institutions. Her professional practice is largely an integration of her own psycho-spiritual health journey, well supported over 17 years by an MD psychotherapist with expertise in transpersonal psychology, along with informal insight meditation and mindfulness practice guided by the teachings of Shinzen Young and others. She did a Master of Theological Studies with a specialization in spiritual and religious care in a pluralist society at Queen's Theological College. Would you all please welcome Ms. Cara Braun.
Does that work? Can you hear me? I feel like it can So thank you for that introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate the connection that I've had with Chris over a number of years now. Just kind of keeping an eye on what's going on here. This is my first visit to this building, this gorgeous place. And Chris, I think, edited the bio that I sent to her. I included a sentence that said, Kara is patiently waiting for the folks at Emmanuel to open the diploma program in Buddhist studies and mental health to distance learners. It fell off my radar this year, but every year I get in touch and say, is there any way that I could begin that program from a distance? It's not possible to travel to Toronto every week, but I'm just so excited that it's happened. I'm really glad that I landed here without a very formal presentation. These opportunities to speak about the wonderful work that I was able to engage in for these 3 years in the Kingston community. Whenever I get a chance to speak about it, I kind of approach the opportunity the way I approach my practice. And for me, that's very much relational. And you know, we see what emerges in the encounter. And so I come here open to what emerges and falls out of my mouth today. And I really appreciate your questions, and maybe I can just speak to some of them. I'd be happy to speak to any of them. I came to this work with an interest in chaplaincy, not coming from any particular spiritual or faith background, certainly no religious community per se. That being said, I grew up in Ontario. I was christened in the United Church when I was 2, but never taken to church. It wasn't part of my upbringing. It was just kind of a family ritual that happened. So I came into chaplaincy really at the very beginning with an interest in working in hospitals. I noticed I had opportunity to be with family in hospitals a few different times in the ICU for months at a time, and just noticed that I felt comfortable in that environment and appreciated the people who were working there, including social workers. And so I was at a stage where I'd finished an MA in educational studies. I didn't feel done with my education. I'd been doing a lot of personal work with this psychotherapist, and I wanted to continue my education, and I wanted it to be something that would give a lot of space for self-reflection. And I liked hospitals. So I thought about medicine quite seriously, actually, and realized pretty quickly that it probably wouldn't be enough space to hold the sense of healing, my understanding of healing, or that it would be difficult to coordinate those. So I just kept looking. What could I do? I could sell drugs. I could do this or that. And somehow I just called up Queen's Theological College one day and said, what does one need to do to be a chaplain? And they said, well, guess what? We have this brand new MTS program. It's called Spiritual and Religious Care in a Pluralist Society. And I thought, wow, that sounds great. I had done my undergrad at Queen's in a lot of cultural studies, sociology and film studies, heavily steeped in postmodernism, and that just seemed like a nice fit. They sent me all the information, and it was clearly a Christian-based program, which didn't really inspire me, to be bluntly honest. But they said, come to an open house. And so I did, and I fell in love with the people. They were very warm and welcoming, and they said, we'll pay your first year tuition. And I said, okay, I'll come and I'll try it. And it was tough. I really didn't know what was going on a lot of the time, but I had wonderfully supportive friends who were helpful. And one of the beautiful pieces about that program, like what's happening here, was that it included 2 units of clinical pastoral education. So those were built into the degree. And that was the first test to do that first basic unit that summer. And I really liked being in the hospital. I was right, I was happy there. So that's how I came to it. I always knew that, working in prisons where I live could be a possibility, and I was open to that. And I had an experience doing some restorative justice courses that took me into Kingston Penitentiary just for a walkabout. But again, I felt comfortable there and was intrigued. And so in the summer of 2013, I was approached by this little nonprofit organization. Their chaplain, their community chaplain. So that was somebody working in the role. The organization had been around for 30 years. The mandate was to support people coming out of the correctional institutions, reintegrating into the community. And their chaplain had left unexpectedly. They were looking for somebody to help out over the summer. I had a bunch of other work lined up, but I said I could do, I'll give you what I can. And they said, well, great, we'll take anything. So it was just supposed to be for the summer. And there was no handoff. There was no database, there was no client list, there was no caseload. The person that had made the contact was working as a chaplain in a federal prison at the time, so she kind of connected me with the institutional chaplains, which was my doorway into the institutions. And I just started going in and meeting whoever was open to meeting with me. And I very quickly fell in love with what it was about, which was always just taking some space, whatever they could provide. The chapels are very busy. There's not a lot of office space, so sometimes it'd be in a little closet. But my practice, is to provide a safe and private space, so we would shut the door if we were both agreeable to that. And the individuals I met with just seemed entirely grateful for the opportunity to be listened to. They would soak it up, and sometimes they would walk in and say, well, I don't really have much to say, but nice to meet you, and I'll sit down for a few minutes, and then 45 minutes later they would say, wow, I didn't think I had much to talk about, but thank you for listening to me. And it just always felt like such a privilege to do that. I would tell people that I was doing this work and they would say, oh my gosh, that must be really gratifying and satisfying. You must feel like you're really giving something and doing something. And I was always kind of struck, that question always jars me a little bit, because it did feel good, but it wasn't that I was giving something and could feel good about that. It was entirely that I was receiving something very big, and I was just fascinated. I'm still fascinated with the question, which may not be answerable, of what is that and what am I experiencing here? And the story that I came to share quite often, and that I'll share now, is that in all the different contexts I've worked in, which includes a lot of on-call at Kingston General Hospital, so a lot of critical care, emergency calls. I've worked in mental health, which I love. I love being in those communities. I'll just add as an aside there, when I do this work, and this is part of my transpersonal steeping, it's very difficult for me to pathologize people's experiences. People say, I feel unwell and I don't want to be this way. I'm happy to kind of put some labels and structure on that. But in mental health, for example, I don't walk around saying those people are very sick. We're all just people, and it's just, like I say, such a privilege to connect. So the work, and I've also done a lot of end-of-life work. What was happening in the experiences of being able to listen to people in prisons was that this profound wisdom exists there. And I always, then give this little disclaimer. Keep in mind, I'm working with a very small window of the population, people that have always come through the chaplain. So I'm not saying, this is a global phenomenon, but the people that I worked with just had this deep wisdom and appreciation for life that I just feel is somehow getting nurtured in a very tragically, disastrously imperfect environment. Corrections, the criminal justice system, not as a whole, but in terms of how it addresses what to do with people, how it will punish people, it is, to my mind, tragic and the largest social justice issue in Canada at the moment. So that was what was feeding me, feeling like, oh my gosh, I have all these experiences, people really, literally ready to say goodbye. I was not getting the same richness of wisdom that I would in these prison environments. So for me, that was just amazing. And I actually see it as, I see the prisons as a monastic community in many ways. It's very ritualized. There's very little freedom. And gosh, it just feels like there's something that happens in that. I don't know, I don't have any explanation for it at this point. So I could tell you so much more, just to give you a broad umbrella of the work. It meant going into the prisons. I would go into the 3 minimum security prisons in Kingston every 6 weeks, and I had a group of people, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, sometimes 8, that I would see regularly. And the model was to be following people into the community. There's research that shows ideally relationships that have been built over at least the course of a year best promote success in the community. A handful of the people that I met with would be released into Kingston. Some were being released into other communities, but they were really open to the support, and a good handful were not going to be released anytime soon, if ever, but were really open to being listened to and to meeting. And to me, that was the richest part of the work. I live in Kingston, and I always say the people that live behind the walls and the fences and the bars are my neighbors, and I'm happy. I was grateful for the privilege to go in there and be a neighbor to them. And then I had a group of people in the community that I was available to as well, and that meant carrying a cell phone, and I did a lot of texting with people. Such a fascinating medium to be present to, and yeah, like I say, I could go on, but I think I'll stop there because I think there can be some rich discussion afterwards. And again, I'm really grateful for the questions that came out of the first presentation. I'm now finishing my last unit of clinical pastoral education, so getting very close to being able to become certified with the Canadian Association of Spiritual Care. And one of the requirements for certification is that a member have the endorsement of a faith community and be affiliated with a faith community, which I do not have. Or there's an option B, where you can provide 3 letters of support from community members who can speak to your involvement in the community and how my spirituality, that's not even a word that I use regularly, how I walk that. So that's very much a part of my day-to-day learning at this moment, anticipating that and figuring out, okay, what is that going to look like for me? Could it mean connecting with a variety of faith communities? And I have wonderful relationships with many communities. So kind of bringing together a multi-faith interfaith endorsement. Should I just go and sign up with a church and take the easy way? I'm not sure, but I'm really open to discussing that with anybody, and what it means to be working as a multi-faith chaplain. I do see myself that way, or as a multi-faith spiritual health practitioner is the new nomenclature. Yeah, and I'm happy to later to answer more questions about what that looks like on the floor on a day-to-day basis in terms of specific religious needs, and then just general practice.
Are there any questions for Kara? Thank you for applying before doing questions. If there are any questions for Kara, please, and she's doing CPE, so you can ask really hard questions. Go ahead.
I have a personal one. Are you ever scared? I've always wondered.
Scared in the prisons?
Yeah, what that must be like the first time you walk in.
I've not been scared, and if anything, I feel very, very protected. You know, and in the community, the clients I worked with, I would make it very clear that they were entirely available to me if I should ever need their help on any day. Which is always, you know, part of a lovely part of the work, just me modeling, me being clear about my boundaries and how I operate in the community and how I'm willing to operate and engage and what's okay and not okay. But I've mostly been in minimum security institutions. I have visited the Regional Treatment Center at Millhaven, which, again, a tragic place to visit. Everybody's literally behind bars. There's no personal freedom, and in fact, when I offered to just kind of go down the corridor and speak to people, it would have to be through a little box. So I'd have to be like this, straining my back. It's, yeah, there are lots of words that come to mind, but I'll keep them here. Yeah.
When you talk about that, when you are in prison, you feel that it's a massive community. I think that touches me a lot, because I remember when we took the 4 precepts, the 4 ordination, or take the final vows, that the master told us that when you vow to take all the precepts and become a monastic, you begin a journey of repentance for your whole life. So, but the question is, what's your feeling about spirituality and religions? Spiritual practice and religious practice, is it different for you, or you interpret it a different way?
In terms of my personal practice?
Like in your mind or in your experience, because people keep talking about spiritual practice and religious practice.
Yeah.
And we as religious people, religious clergy, we usually are labeled as religious people that should not go to the campus or should not go to whatever.
Right.
And so, being a chaplain, it removes this kind of label. And so you can go to hospital, go to the prison, and people will not worry about you converting them to a certain religion, you know. I think that's good, because I talked to some of the Catholic father and nun. So many years ago, they decided that they can not to wear the uniform robe when they go to the hospital. And then when we have a formal ceremony, then they wear the uniform. And I'm aware that some of our Buddhist tradition, like Braun Buddhism, they follow this path. Usually they would take the very simple clothes, but only when the ceremony they wear like this.
Right.
So I'm just like in my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, spiritual practice. What does that mean for Westerner, and what is religious practice means to you?
Yeah. So I'll try and answer. I appreciate the question. You know, for me, I'm just trying to do my bit of work. I really am, and it doesn't even feel like a choice on most days. It just feels like I have to keep moving forward. It's scary to think of what the consequences of not would be. And then I get all sorts of creative options in terms of how to do that, right? And on some days, I would like to come and be with you and wear the robes and, you know, just focus and forget having to walk the dog and feed the kids and all of those things. For me, I also, I guess I kind of see myself as a bit of a chameleon. So I can walk around and just keep practicing, keep coming back, trying to make it, trying to integrate the practice as much as possible throughout my day and in all of my relationships, and, you know, adopting some monastic rituals myself, you know, keeping my house a certain way. But I like the fluidity of being able to move in and out, and I love not being labeled. I really don't want to go and belong to one place because it just so doesn't fit, you know, the circle for me. And at the same time, there are these requirements, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. I also work as an elementary supply teacher, so I get to go into schools and just smile at children and tell them with my eyes that I think they're wonderful and can learn whatever they want to learn, and that we're all learning all the time. Again, for me, it's all relational. Then I get to drop these little mindfulness lessons in. Yeah, does that answer your question at all?
We can take that up when we open it up later, because I think there's a lot of curiosity about monasticism based on the first two talks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes me a while to process. So maybe tomorrow we can talk.
I saw a hand over here. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I did. We have time.
Yeah, I think we'll do your question, and then we might need to move on to just make sure we have plenty of time at the end.
So I'm just interested in your experience working as a chaplain in the prison system, and my question is, what are some of the common, if there are any common spiritual issues that prisoners would come to you for advice or to be a sound on?
Yeah, so wonderful question. Thank you. I would say one of the biggest themes that they don't always articulate explicitly, but is always operating, is grief. Huge amounts of grief. Just immense loss. That usually, you know, the stories actually don't vary too much in terms of how people get to prison. So it's often immense loss that started in childhood, in the environment, which typically, you know, could include poverty, abuse, addiction, mental health, and on and on and on. So that's part of it, is just helping them see that those losses have been there, and how those losses getting carried, and how do those losses come into the way that life unfolded for them. There's a lot of talk in prison about choices, in schools too. I'm not always convinced that we have choices, and I think there's lots of space on a societal and cultural level for us to take much more responsibility for how we care for each other, and what are the consequences of not caring for each other. I would love to see that be part of the criminal justice system. How is it that this person ended up here, that these actions happened, and to what degree are we responsible for that, rather than putting the onus always on the individual. And then we're not even getting into what happens to victims. So grief is big. Who is God in this is is large. You know, I'm recalling somebody who was getting very close to the end of his sentence. In fact, he was applying to be deported, which would mean the end of his sentence. It's a big process, but it's not uncommon, because he wouldn't be able to be paroled into the community because he's not a Canadian citizen. So then they look at deporting him back to his country of origin. I remember this one individual, finally, I'd known him for almost 2 years. It came out one day that he, in getting very close to being released, was deeply concerned that God, and he had had these incredible experiences of healing and transcendence. He was worried that even though he was going to be physically released, that God would not see him as being finished paying for his crime, which included somebody losing their life. So it's wasn't small stuff in any way, but he was carrying that weight, and so then that becomes the work. Well, who is God to you, and what would a God that didn't feel you were finished be like? And is there space to consider a God who's joyfully happy for you and is okay with how things are unfolding? And then there's lots of just day-to-day crap that people are dealing with, like miserable things, senior citizens whose rooms get kind of rampaged by security who think they're looking for something and take away all their supports that they use for maneuvering around their room, or all sorts of stuff. And a lot of there's a certain segment of people who have the cognitive capacity and drive to be their own defense and, yes, initiate lawsuits against the government for either the way their sentence was dealt with or for injustices that are happening in the prison. And I loved all of that. I would just cheer, and every time I would say, thank you for doing that work, because you are inside. You are witnessing what I get a glimpse of here through your words and stories, but that my neighbors have no idea of, and that I know. Like, I just so desperately want to have 3 weeks to write a letter to Justin Trudeau, because he doesn't know. There's no way that people know what it's like for people in there. It's a very uncaring environment, and it's so shame is another theme. It's just pervasive everywhere. And shame is typically part of how people got there in the first place, just really seeing themselves poorly. The thought just disappeared.
Let's please thank Kara one more time. So our final speaker will be Ms. Charmaine Mak. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Mak, either way.
Okay. Who was Buddhist chaplain in the Pacific region for Corrections Canada in 2010. I think we saw your name on one of the slides, is that correct? Yeah. So, from Dr. Liu's panel. Charmaine was one of 2 serving Buddhist chaplains in all of Canada at the time. She made her way to Toronto at the end of 2013 when her position as Buddhist chaplain there ended. Now working in healthcare, she incorporates her Buddhist practice in her work and everyday life. Though born into a Buddhist family, Charmaine wasn't an active practitioner until a chance meeting with Zazep Rinpoche in 1995. In 1998, Rinpoche, now her root guru, sent her to participate in a 7-year program of intensive Buddhist studies called the Master's Program in Italy at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, coordinated by the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. The program was a compressed version of the Geshe program, the Doctor of Divinity, taught in the major monasteries in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Will you all please welcome Ms. Charmaine Mak.
hope my talk will be informative and beneficial. So, I had no intention of being a chaplain. I actually fell into it quite by accident. My teacher, one of my early Buddhist teachers, Venerable was retiring as Buddhist chaplain in BC, and they needed a replacement. And so they were looking, there was a call out for people with Buddhist training or with Buddhist practice, would they please step up, and so forth. I, at that time, thought, well, I'd do it for one summer until they find somebody. So I volunteered. I actually asked Rinpoche, I said, do you think it's beneficial that I do this? And he says, yeah, go on ahead and try. And so I did. So I went and applied, and I got an interview with the director at that time for BC Corrections, or Corrections Canada in BC. And him and his sister were sitting there, and they started asking me questions about, what was my experience, how much do I know about Dharma, how much do I know about Buddhism, things like that. And so I had to translate my jargon to Christian jargon for him to understand what I knew. I actually kind of made a connection with him because I said, oh, I went to a Baptist kindergarten when I was a kid. So we learned about Jesus and Mary and Daniel and Moses and things like that. So he goes, oh, so I actually knew more about Christianity than he did about Buddhism. And this is a person who's interviewing me for the position, and he has no clue about Dharma. So he asked, so you have a Bible? No, there is no Bible. We have texts. We have sutras, and then there's Tantra, which is a whole other category. And he goes, okay, so you are, and he thinks Buddhist, if you're a Buddhist, it's that's it. There are no different traditions. There isn't the Chinese tradition, there's the Tibetan tradition. So I kind of explained, zip file, the entire history of Buddhism in this interview. And I had been in this intensive study, which was 7 years of intensive study and 1 year of retreat prior to doing this program. So I knew enough, I thought, but I didn't think I was good enough for the position. And there was somebody else vying for the position. And I actually really wanted the other person to have the job because I thought I didn't know anything about chaplaincy, especially about in corrections. So he actually sat back and he said to me, what makes you so different from the inmates? And I said, I didn't get caught. And he looked at me, and his assistant was laughing. She almost fell off the chair laughing. I said, I'm not a criminal, I haven't done anything criminal, but I've done things like smoke pot. If I had, at that time, had a police officer come by, I would have been arrested. It's just karma that I have to explain karma to him. It's just, I didn't get caught for whatever circumstances that happened. Things did not happen that way. Otherwise, I would be in juvenile corrections or something else would have changed. So I said, that's what made me different. We make certain choices, so certain things happen in our lives at a certain time, and it goes one way or another. We don't know which way karma is going to go for us. We never know. So, like that. And then he goes, okay. So the next day I got the email saying I was hired because I think like a criminal. And sometimes it helps to think like a criminal. So I went to my job, and there was no orientation. They don't train you in security. They don't train you in how protocol is. They just kind of throw you and say, okay, you have an ID that says with a little plastic thing with your face on it that says your name and chaplain, Buddhist chaplain, and then you go into different institutions. I was chaplain for all the institutions. So there were 7 institutions from maximum to minimum, male and female, and I visited all of them. And I was a part-time chaplain. So my time was very, very limited. And you spend a lot of time driving, and you spend a lot of time waiting. There's a lot of waiting in chaplaincy. And it's you're waiting between gates, because you get to one section, they make you stand there, they press a button, so you gotta wave to the camera, they press the button, the door opens, then you walk through, the door closes, then you wait there, and if they get distracted, you're stuck there. And then they press another button, and the door opens, and then you go and do your thing. Okay, so there's a lot of waiting. So I went there with no idea of how to do my job. No one taught me through it. No one did, like, this is what you do. They just say, this is the chapel, so go. And just like that. And to be very honest, I was scared, because they said, oh, there are no guards in the chapel. You have a little buzzer here, and you just wear that, and if anything goes wrong, just press the red button that you attach to your belt, and we'll come get you. The guardhouse is about 100 meters away from the chapel. So you learn very quickly, in the time that you do this, and someone coming through the door, it might be too late. So my first introduction was I got to practice death and impermanence very, very quickly. I learned that's what you practice. And every time I went to work, I was like, today might not be the day I come back. And that's a reality. That's a very strong reality. Because there are no guards around you. You are alone with the inmates, with the guys, or the girls, right? And I didn't have a uniform. I wasn't a nun. I wore street clothes. So I was thinking, what is my uniform? The Dharma is my uniform. All the teachings of the Buddha in here are my uniform, is my uniform. That's what I bring to work every day, knowing that I might not come up alive. And it sounds kind of like very dramatic, but that's how I dealt with things. Okay. So security is a very, very big issue. And I would always think, because there was no manual to tell you how to behave like a chaplain or what to do as a chaplain, I had no guide. So my guide was the teachings about karma. Is this karmically right or wrong? And that was all, that's how I managed my way as a chaplain. Okay. So when I met some of the individuals, I understood how they felt, because they were in an enclosed environment for a very long time. Federal is more than 2 years. So I understood being what it's like to be in a small place for a very long time with very few opportunities to leave. Because I was in this small village in Italy doing this intensive program, and there was one bus at 6 o'clock in the morning, one bus at noon, and one bus at 6 p.m. And we actually never really left the Dharma Center or this monastery. So when I started talking, to the guys, I would say, well, I understand what it feels like, because Monday was this, I still know the schedule for the food. Monday was pasta, Tuesday was pizza, and they go, yeah, we have a schedule like that too. They know what days it is by the menu. That's how you figure out the days, especially if you're in segregation. You know what day it is, right? And I said to them, when I went into the program, the world ran on VHS, and when I left the And they go, yeah, they got that. So there was kind of like an understanding of what's it like to be in a very enclosed environment and, you know, living day to day with people you may or may not like, and just kind of living a daily life doing the same thing over and over and over again. The schedule is always the same, right? And that's how. And then you have special like holidays. You have little breaks and stuff like that. So when you're a Buddhist chaplain, people around you don't practice Dharma. You get to practice Dharma. You get to practice Dharma a lot. And it's like, you're practicing the 6 perfections. And I practice patience a lot. Patience in dealing with bureaucrats, patience with paperwork, patience with standing in corridors. Okay. So, so it took a lot of, and I got a lot of time to meditate or to say prayers when I was driving back and forth. Because the institutions in BC are kind of, not rural, but it's in Abbotsford. And Abbotsford is also in the Bible Belt of BC. So it's a bit difficult when you're the Buddhist chaplain there too, because a lot of the people who are employed in the institutions are from Abbotsford. So they're not always very friendly towards Buddhists. And that makes things very difficult. Makes things difficult to like bring materials in. So sometimes people try and donate books, and the books never reach the inmates, nor to the chaplains of different, not only of Buddhists, but of other faiths. The people who receive them will open them up to look, and they go, this is garbage, and they'll just throw it in the garbage. So they never see stuff. I don't see some of the stuff. And then some of the chaplains will go through and look, and they go, oh, this is what the guards threw in the garbage. We saved this. So it's like, okay. So it makes distributing materials very, very difficult. And that's very hard because all they have time, all they can do there is read. They have time to do reading and research. If you don't give them these materials, they can't transform their minds, right? I visited all these institutions, so it's basically every 2 weeks I would visit one institution twice a month. And in that time I visited the institution, it was 2 hours. And I was lucky if I got 1 hour to be able to conduct a meditation or to be able to do one-on-one with the individuals. So time gets squished. And then that's not, and because there's a schedule of what time you can do practice or where you can have visitors. So by about 5:30, you have to leave. So imagine if you're living in Vancouver, it's a 2-hour drive to Abbotsford. You get there, and then you have to go through the security process. And by the security process, you finally get to where you need to get to. And then the guys don't necessarily wait for you there. They have to wait for you to show up first before they bring the individuals into the chapel. So that takes another time. And then you sit down and maybe you can meditate or talk very quickly and then go. So the window of time maybe is an hour. And then some groups are bigger than others. Sometimes there's only one person, which is great. You get to talk. And other times, like Mountain Institution has like 20 people, 20 guys. Mountain is a very interesting institution because it is the institution where all the sex offenders go. They have a special institution for them. They can't be in the general population. They'll die. So for me, Mountain was very interesting because I'm the only female in the room. You know, everyone sitting there is a sex offender. You don't know what kind of sex offender, but you know they're a sex offender. And you know it's serious because they're in federal prison. And all I have is a little red button beside me, and I don't know if anything happens whether someone will come in time. So when you meditate, you really meditate. At least I did. And we'd sit and meditate. Some people, some of the guys were very sincere. The first day of the first month I arrived, it was a packed house. The chapel was just full of people because I was new. So when you're new, they're all there to check you out, to test you. And one of the big commodities in prison is incense permits. Then they say, like, what do you need incense permit? An incense permit so I can meditate. Not true. Incense is to hide the smell of pot and other activities in the cells. So we had a huge problem with incense. So I decided, and if you sign it, goodbye. You'll never see that person again. And you can't revoke the incense permit. Only the guards or the managers of the units have the right to revoke that. So I kind of put a system in. I said, okay, you can have your incense permit if you show up for 3 months, memorize the short prayer, repeat the prayer back to me, and then I will sign your incense permit. And I did that because I wanted them to put some effort into the Dharma. I knew that some of them would wait it out and just memorize and never come back. So I thought, if I make them memorize a prayer, that will be karmic seeds in the mind. If they never see me again, at least the seed of Dharma will keep growing from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And at some point, they'll be a Buddha. And that's how I did it. So when I made that announcement, everyone was like, okay. The next time I showed up the next month, the room had like maybe 5 people. The other one had 2. Kind of read it. I actually learned that trick from my cousin. He had this professor, he attended this class, and the first day of class, the professor put all these articles they had to read for the semester. It's like over like 50 or 60 pages, or 60 articles, and that was like the class. And he says, this is what we're going to read this semester. And the next class that showed up, like the class, like just everyone dropped out, save for 10 people, right? And then he said, you know that list I gave you guys? He tore it up. That's not the real list. This is the real list. There was like 5 articles for them to read, right? So it's kind of a weeding out process. But if you want to learn the Dharma, learn the Dharma. I have very limited time. So I want to reach the Dharma. I want to give the Dharma to the individuals who really want the Dharma. It doesn't serve any purpose if I keep giving stuff and you cause harm with the Dharma. It's an impure motivation in some ways. Okay? So the incense permit, some people did it, other people didn't. One guy went 3 months. He was there for like a 5-year sentence. It was 3 months, and I'm like, are you planning to leave here anytime soon in the next 3 months that I need to know about? No. Okay, then you can wait 3 months. And he did it. Right? The assistant director actually told me, thank you for implementing this program. I said, why? And she said, because of you, other faiths and other traditions that have incense start following your protocol. They used to have 100 complaints about human rights for incense a week. They were not being allowed to have incense. But because I started this protocol, the human rights complaints about incense use dropped to 0. She said, you took it down to 90%. You made our paperwork like reduced by 90% for human rights complaints. So I said, oh, it was unintentional, but I'm glad it was helpful. Okay. So there are certain things like security issues when I was there. As a Dharma practitioner, because I belong to the Tibetan tradition, there's a lot of doohickeys, like malas, And because Amila Ann had been, was also in Tibetan tradition, she would say, oh yeah, you can have it. Oh, she'd sign it off and stuff like that. I was actually not like that. I said, well, the picture of the Buddha is perfectly valid, so you don't need a statue. You can have a picture. And so they were quite upset. And they wanted to, actually someone filed a human rights complaint about that, about me. And the chaplains and security asked me, why are you giving them only pictures? I said, if you can put it in a sock and swing it, you can't have it. If I say you can have a heavy metallic object and someone uses it as a weapon, I get the karma. I have enough negative karma in my life for lifetimes to come. I don't need to add more. So you can use a picture of Dellen Dorje, you can use a picture of Buddha. There you go. So then the group started to like drop off. Because it's about owning stuff. There's like, it's kind of like a currency. Like I get to own stuff, look what I got. That's kind of a bit of that mentality. So I wanted to make people be very sincere, but the sincere practitioners were really sincere. They were hardcore practitioners. They did prostrations, they did water bowls, and they did things that what they could. They will have these little cups, little paper cups, and they go, I did my water bowl offering. There you go. So they were really sincere. I was very inspired by their dedication. So it actually made me up my game, right? No, you have to, because they're not wasting their time. Why are you wasting your time, right? So I would probably was a better practitioner than what I am now. Okay. So there were, with these security issues, you're not allowed to have long mamas, these prayer beads in the institutions. And you can't have them because they use them as weapons to strangle people. These are things you don't think about, but these are realities in the institutions. I started to get a little bit paranoid. I started to see like people jogging in the street, like looking in the neighborhood. I'm like, you could be a thief like casing the neighborhood, and people would, your mind starts thinking like that. Like he could possibly be someone just seeing whose house is empty. You start thinking like that, right? So, or they use the malas as polka chips. They cut the string and then they use it as polka chips. So no long malas. And again, if you wanted a wrist mala, you had to attend class for 3 months and memorize the prayer and recite the prayer. Because also sometimes what happens is people get released, and then when they leave, they don't usually follow up. They don't find a Dharma center. So when they leave, I think, okay, the Dharmic seeds are still growing in their mind stream. This is making sense so far? Okay. So space in chaplaincy is very limited. There's only the chapel. And because there are so many different faiths, sometimes it's very hard to coordinate real estate. And you don't want to have 2 different groups in the same chapel. So sometimes you try and organize your schedule, and that makes it very difficult for scheduling too, because there's time limit, who can show up, what you can do. So on those days when the chapel is being occupied, I try and do one-on-ones. I go to the different units and I try and visit the people and see what they need. Okay. Being a Buddhist chaplain, so the video that Dr. Liu showed, mentioning about volunteers. I was part of that actually when the part-time contracts were revoked. I was part of the group that the contracts were revoked. So they wanted the part-time chaplains to be volunteers. which is fine. There's a problem though. When you're a chaplain, you actually have access to files and you're able to understand who did what. Like, why is the inmate in that particular institution, and why is that inmate spending that much time in that institution? Okay. Volunteers may not necessarily be told the nature of the person's crime. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, especially in mountain institution where the sex offenders are, a lot of them like to practice Tantra. And because some deities, Tantra has a sexual component, you have to be very careful about what you're talking about and how you introduce it. So I said, well, we'll just do breathing meditation. We'll do mindfulness meditation. We'll do Vipassana meditation. I'm not qualified to teach Tantra. I don't want to talk about Tantra. Right? So sometimes you have to be very careful about what you teach. So volunteers, and actually there was a case of someone being transferred to another institution on the island, and some volunteers went there and they started to teach him Tantra. I found out later. He was from Mountain Institution. He is not allowed to have any contact with his children until they reach 21. I'll just say it like that. So you have to be, and they don't know, they can't get that information. Right? So as a chaplain, you get to see certain things, or you get to read certain things that volunteers may not necessarily have access to. And that also you have to think about that karmically speaking as well. Like what information are you giving? How are they using that information? What is it doing to their mind? I don't have so much to talk that it's going to last 20 minutes, so I don't know what else, I mean, I have stories. I have stories and experience of what happened. It's, Kent Institution is it's a maximum institution in BC. Meditation. So one time at Kent Institution, one of the chaplains said, is it almost time?
Yeah.
Okay, can I just finish one quick story? Okay. So Kent Institution, what happened was the chaplain says, we're going to get some inmates in this unit and we're going to do meditation with them. And I said, okay. So I went in, they came in, he said, they're only from one unit, they don't mix population in different units in Kent Institution. They're sitting there and we meditate, and I didn't think anything of it. It was like 45 minutes of breath meditation. And everyone left, and it was time for me to go. And then the chaplain said, that was great, that was great, that was really good. The guys are really calm. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And then 5 minutes later, she said, that was such a good meditation. The guys are really, really calm. The manager of the unit's really happy. And I'm like, okay. And then the other chaplain company goes, oh, that was great. The manager of the unit's. I'm like, you guys are not telling me something. You guys are too happy. So what is going on that you're not telling me? And then they said, oh, well, we didn't want to tell you this before you arrived. I'm like, what is it? And they said, those guys who came into the meditation group, they were planning a riot in Kent Institution, and they were going to start the riot today. So we didn't know how to calm them down. So we thought you would give it a shot, and so we brought them to the chapel and see, if you could calm them down with breathing meditation. So the guys went back to the unit. They're really happy. They're very calm. There is no situation. So I'm like, so there's not going to be a riot. And she goes, no, it's great. Everybody's really happy. The warden is really happy. Everybody's really happy. I'm like, oh, good. When I was driving home, I suddenly realized what had really happened. Like the emotion of what happened caught up with me. I started crying on the highway because I just stopped people from dying. And that's a scary thing and a very empowering thing at the same time. You stopped violence. Somehow you were able to help stop violence in a very tense situation. You know? So there's a term for that. It's called dynamic security. That's the actual term they use in corrections. And they say, that's great. So as a Buddhist chaplain, I can tell you more. I don't know what more you want to know. But this is my experience, and I hope it was helpful and informative.
We're eager to have all the panelists together, so if you have a specific question for Charmaine, maybe I'll ask you to ask it if the panel, sort of has a lull. So could I ask Dr. Liu and Kara and Charmaine to sit at the table? And before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge a special guest we have here today. Sister Elaine McGinnis is with us, who has a long history of work in the prison system in Canada, and she very graciously accepted Chris's invitation to come today. And I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to share with us, but at the very least, I want to acknowledge that you're here today.
Move the chair to the front.
As you can see, I needed help to get here. I'm 92 years of age, and I've been meditating for 60 years. I met Zen after I became a nun. I entered when I was 30, and I took the usual training. Although I wasn't a great religious person before that, and however I was able not to get kicked out, and I put my 8 years of preparation in, and reading quite a lot about as much as I could get my hands on. At that time, our community was very young, and we didn't have very many books. But I read what was there, and but I had, thank God, joined a foreign mission community, and I knew I was headed for the missions. And from all my writing, I think I should say first of all, I'm a violinist, I'm a musician, and there's something about music that even my Zen master in Japan said the same thing. That helps so much, he said, in training for meditation. And I suppose it's saying things and making beauty without words, without particular intellection going on. Anyway, I made it in the community. I was accepted. I made it as a prospect to go abroad, and happily I was given the mission of Japan. And I'm not very good at languages, and it's one of the worst in the world. I hope not to mean Japanese, but it is here. But it's very difficult, And I was, 30-some years of age then, and their kanji is so difficult. And I had to write everything in kanji, of course. So it was quite an undertaking. But anyway, one day that was over, and I got to the mission. I found out that in Japan, I did my best to study the country and the people as much as I could, and I was fascinated by their meditation. I don't know why it appealed to me, but it did. Of course, I was meditating as a Catholic sister anyway. But I was fascinated by their meditation and just what I'd heard about it. And I'd heard about this great Jesuit, a German Jesuit who had was quite famous in Japan. Actually, his little church was the first, when the first atomic bomb was let off, it was over his little church. And he survived some way or other. So anyway, I met him. So he said, well, if you're going to be spending the rest of your life in Japan. He said, why don't you learn something about Zazen? And I said, Zazen, what's that? He says, the Za means you squat on the floor. You don't sit or kneel or anything like that. And the Zen means meditation. So I, a little intimidated, so I said, well, if I could have a woman teacher. I said, I think that would be fine. You know, lots of women, there are women roshis here in Japan, and Roshi is the Zen master. And so he found one for me, and I got started. She couldn't speak a word of English, not one word. And so I had a little, I was studying Japanese. I'm not great at it, but I got through to her. And I think she found me interesting enough. But her first talk to me was, and she said in Japanese, ten ni mashimasu, whatever no chichio. If you're here, those are the first words of the Our Father. And she said, I just want to warn you that if your God is in heaven, you're never going to do very well in Buddhism. And well, that didn't worry me a bit, but trying to get her to see that it was okay for my God to be in heaven, as well as every other thing, it kind of discouraged me at the time. But anyway, I signed up for the first retreat. How many people have made a Zen session? Okay? There we got up at 3 a.m. and we had to sleep in our clothes, and we were meditating at 3:05. And I didn't get my face washed for 3 days, I think. And so cold. It was quite an experience. But anyway, I was determined to make it, and I've made probably 100 sessions since then, and I'm still alive. And still very proud to sit in meditation with the Buddhists. I was very lucky. I got a wonderful teacher, Father himself, she said there's a man making a name for himself. She said, unfortunately, it's not a woman, Roshi, but it's a Japanese, and she said he's a businessman. So I said, well, that's okay. And so I studied with him. In fact, I lived almost at his house almost all the time there. I just went back to my own little apartment for sleeping because he had the zendo there, a place to meditate, and people were coming and going, and all the cushions and the bells that you need, they were all there. So it was just very convenient, and he was an exceptional man. His English was almost non-existent, but I had enough Japanese to make it, and quite soon, probably because I had, well, my music, he said, I came to the Satori experience. And it's always announced publicly that this Sister May gave it this experience. I confirmed it at such and such a date. She's going to start her koan study now. You all know Japanese Zen koans, I'm sure. And there are about 500 in our way of studying. So I started that long study. So that's why it took me so long to finish all that. But I was able to live in Japan almost all those years and live close to a man who was living, indeed, what he was teaching. And above all things, I'm grateful for that. And so I started zendos wherever I went. In England, we had beautiful zendos. We had about 12 zendos over the country. We had legitimate, it takes a teacher, about 5, 6, 7 years to get through the Cuilan study so they can teach. But eventually we had a teacher for each of those zendos. And I was in the Philippines, they're wonderful at meditating. And it was, it's just been a marvelous experience. And now that I'm old and white, with my hair, I don't actually do very much teaching anymore. But I have a zendo here. And we meet regularly, and once a week or sometimes twice a week for sitting. And we bring a roshi from Japan. That's my wish to keep the Japanese close to us too. And so anyway, we've been able to carry on in such a way that it's been very, very rewarding for me, and I think rewarding for Buddhism here, because it's, I never became a Buddhist. I didn't feel the need, and I was so involved and so satisfied, really, with my prayer life in Buddhist meditation, as so many called it that. It was just always zazen, of course, for us who speak Japanese. But it's just at this age and time of life, I just feel very, very grateful. And I feel very, very close to all of you. And I hope you continue, and I hope you meditate too.
Thank you very much, Sister Elaine. By way of sort of stirring the pot for some Q&A here, I had just a couple of quick responses that hopefully will sort of jog your memory of some of the earlier speeches and kind of bring us to a place of good Q&A here. Dr. Liu's presentation I very much appreciated, and her question about one chaplain, and is this a multi-faith chaplain, or what do we call this chaplain, is an interesting one, and I think it started some fruitful conversation after her speech. You know, one of the things that struck me immediately was thinking of chaplain more in terms of it as a professional role. You know, it has many different components to it, but what are the responsibilities within an institution? We heard from Charmaine a bit about the kind of incredible scope of responsibilities that are put upon a prison chaplain. You know, and in healthcare you might have other sorts. And so maybe how that, so in response to her question about multi-faith chaplain, I sort of written down to myself, or do we speak of just professional chaplains and how that's distinct from maybe the particular religious or spiritual orientation of the chaplain themselves. Kara, I really appreciated a couple of things that came up. You know, she used the words community, relational, and neighbors several times, and these seem to me very important words. You know, I come from the United States, where we have, in a way, very much larger prison problems. But looking at Canada, even though on a given day, I think it's something like only 40,000 prisoners in jails and prisons here versus the United States, where the number's so high we probably couldn't fit the number in the room. You know, so there's a great difference in terms of volume, but you are dealing with many of the same problems that we deal with in the States, problems of accountability and transparency by corrections officers and institutions, problems of race. I was reading through some statistics today about how many more First Nations people and how many more Black Canadians entered the prison system under the Harper government in particular. The number, I think, for Black Canadians was something like it went up 70% in those years, and there was a 50% rise of First Nations inmates during the Harper years as well. So, you know, these issues of kinds of thinking about community and who winds up in our prison system, why, are good ones. And I think, a persistent question for Buddhists working in prison chaplaincy, it seems to me we do a very good job of going to prisons and working with prisoners. Maybe an area that Buddhists in Canada and the United States could stand to do a little bit more work on is, restorative justice advocacy, work for prisoners once they leave prisons, which seems to be a great concern in the United States with recidivism rates being so high. And interestingly, the CDC did a big report this summer on prisons in Canada, and they noted there has not been a systematic study of recidivism in Canada since the early 90s. So we don't know very much fact-based about recidivism. No one has sort of done the number crunching for quite a long time. And Cara also brought up the issue of mental health care, and I was struck to learn a lot about 91.7% of inmates in Canada have some sort of diagnosable mental illness, 87.2% have a substance abuse problem, and 56% have a diagnosed antisocial personality disorder. So this raises the huge question of why aren't we doing better to care for these people, and why is prison the place they end up? And I thought she did a lot to sort of point in that direction. So I think these are important words to sort of continue to think of, neighbors, community, relational, and how we, handle some of these problems beyond, as Kara said, not just punishing them, but what do we do that's truly restorative to help people. And then Charmaine, I was struck by the beginning of her talk when she talked about how many prisons she had to, how many facilities she had to serve, and then the expectation once, she lost her position, was expected to be a volunteer, the enormity of what we expected from you as a volunteer. And then also what you talked about in terms of the Dharma is your uniform. Reminded me very much of Michael Monnett's piece that he wrote for the Journal of Pastoral Care and Counseling about developing a Zen peacemaker's approach to professional chaplaincy. And one of the things he said in that piece was, where does Buddhism come into being a professional chaplain? And he said it's how you creatively engage with others. So how you listen, how you address and resolve problems, how you do other things. It's how you work. It's not so much something you wear on your sleeve and sort of, it's not necessarily in rites and rituals, but in how you soldier through things that are trying on you as the chaplain, and how you help others work through the things that they're working through as well. So there was a great deal in these talks, I thought, for us to think about. And obviously, very early on, we had great interest in the monastic issue and the issue of chaplain responsibilities. So I might circle back to that to start and ask all of you what your dinner time. So maybe we'll just take a couple of questions then instead before dinner. If everyone's willing and able, we can just take a couple of questions. Anyone?
Can I just jump in and make sure people are aware that after the part-time contracts were eliminated, the Harper government's next step, which happens at some point in 2013, was to change the model of correctional-based chaplaincy to make it, they privatized it. So a private contract held the chaplaincy, looked after the chaplaincy for 2 years. Then there was a bidding again this past year, and now a new company is looking after all of the contracts.
Can I add to that? So the previous organization, the first company when it was privatized, it was Kairos Numa, and they were all chaplains that were already in Corrections Canada, but they came together to form Kairos Numa to bid for this contract. Okay? This new company is Bridges of Canada. Bridges is actually an evangelical organization based from the States. And so now they have this organization, Bridges of Canada, which is now deciding how chaplaincy is run. So a foreign company is deciding the policies of how chaplaincy is run within Canada. Okay? And because it's an evangelical organization, certain agendas are being run. I'll say it as politely as I can. I have other thoughts.
It's okay with me if you don't want to be polite.
It's going to be on YouTube. No. So there are certain agendas that are being run. And it may or may not, well, yes, it has been affected because the Harper, after the company was privatized, I'm the last, if it was the last Buddhist chaplain under Corrections Canada in the federal government. Anybody after that is all privatized, right? So there's also a different idea because privatized companies work for profit. Okay? So when we were Corrections Canada, there was no profit margin involved here. So the bidding war. So salaries were greatly reduced in some aspects, and expectations were higher in others. So you really need to think about that, right? And this is from what I understand, they try and implement certain laws that are based in the States in the contracts here for Bridges of Canada.
What happened to the first company?
Sorry?
What happened to the first company?
The first company did it with Bridges of Canada, and they lost.
So there is a term for the...
Yeah, they had 2 years. Kairos Nemo had 2 years. Well, the government was trying to figure out what they were going to do. And then they continued the privatization mode, and Bridges came in, and it became about dollars and cents. It's not, it's under Public Works. It's not under a different Ministry of Public Works. It's not under something, it's not what it was before. And the bidding for Bridges, they got the contract by a difference of $1.
Insider information?
Kairos Numa lost out by $1.
Should have been the dollar.
I'm curious with the turnover of the new government, is there any motivation or emphasis upon the new regime that's in Ottawa at this point to revisit that, or is that even on the radar at all?
I'm sure it is. I haven't heard anything directly speaking to that, but I can tell you that the new government has taken a great interest in Kingston in looking at the closure of the prison farms and beyond Kingston, and the Minister of Public Safety was in Kingston in the fall. There was a very successful town hall meeting, really well attended, where people were very frank about the wishes of the community to have the farms reopened, and it felt to me very positive. It felt like there was lots of listening happening. So I have a good feeling. Just my feeling. It's positive, pleasant.
I guess I'm directing this my question is, how effective do you feel like that short amount of chaplaincy was to the population? Like, how do you feel like, I'm assuming you did Buddhist mindfulness practices with the inmates, and I'm wondering how
spiritual, their Buddhist practice were?
Yeah, meaning in the sense of like, they asked to come see you,
Yes.
right? Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, was that beneficial only because you said you got such a short time?
Yeah, so it depends whether it was a one-on-one or it was a group, right? Because it really depends on whether that day, the other part is sometimes we have lockdowns. You arrive and everything's locked down, so you don't get to see anybody. Or if you do see someone, it's through the door, with a little slot they have there. So it really varies, right? And everyone comes into the Dharma. When I meet them, they come at various stages. Some people have been practicing for many years. Other people have been practicing in different traditions other than the tradition that I was trained in. So you try and find common ground or common practices like breath meditation, right? Certainly, I'm not qualified to teach Tantra. Some people already have like Tantra initiations. So I say, well, if this is what you have a permission to do this practice, then continue doing this practice, right? And you can write to your lama or your teacher and so forth, right? Other people could just come in because they want to do breath meditation, and you sit there and you do breath. I've done one-on-one breath meditation with people, and other times I've done it in a group. So it really varies, And sometimes it's in the Tibetan tradition it's called Tongren, so it's receiving, giving and taking. So you have compassion meditation. I never made things very complicated. There's a very high rate of illiteracy in these institutions. So you have to not dumb it down. You have to respect them as people, but at the same time not make things overly complicated. Does that make sense? And some people you give them something and they go, and they're like, I'm done this practice. You tell them, you need to do prostration. I've done my 100,000, give me something else, So they're really, really excited. And other people, you give them something and you never see them again. So it just varies. And you can follow up. And, sometimes they don't show up because it's a personality difference. They like the previous, chaplain and they didn't like me or something like that, right? No. So, but you try and follow up people's progress as best as you can. They say something and you're never really sure sometimes, and not everyone will, I've reached this level, or, so it's just talking and getting to know someone and listening to them and just really respecting them as a human being. Because when people found out that I was a Buddhist chaplain, and that was the time when Breaking Bad was really popular, and Oz was really popular, people would come up to me, is it like Oz? Is it like Breaking Bad? And I never watched Breaking Bad because it was so depressing, because that was not entertainment, that was work. Because I knew people like that, right? And it's actually very disrespectful, I found, to assume that this is what people are like in the institutions. I found it very sad and very disrespectful. Because these are human beings with lives and feelings and thoughts. They're not there for your entertainment. And you watch Oz or Breaking Bad, and that's 1 hour of your life. Unless you're binge watching, but that's another story. Right? These people live this every day. So you come in with respect, and you come in with compassion. You may not always agree with them, but you always respect them as a human being. Always. Does that answer your question?
I just want to piggyback that by saying I could not enjoy Orange is the New Black. I tried. It could have been a common ground with my, young adult daughter, and I just can't enjoy it because it's turning something that's a very real experience into entertainment, and I just couldn't connect with it. I think it's really important to say, or I would like to share, that I met so many people, individuals who had had the opportunity to participate in Freeing the Human Spirit programs, which is Sister Elaine's program, so yoga and meditation, and they would report that it was, at the very least, a